Hi, my name is Amrita and this is Amrita by the Book, where today I'd like to talk about 4 really popular tropes in fantasy that I think are more than a little bit played out and could do with a bit of deconstructing, reinvigorating, or just straight up disposal. I'm not picky. So first up is the lucky novice, who is a character that is much beloved in fantasy and in multiple genres actually. And this particular character is often really tied to the chosen one trope as well, where you have this one person toiling away in obscurity, usually the son of a farmer somewhere, and generally male, sometimes female, especially as of late. And that person is plucked out of obscurity when it is discovered entirely by chance that this person is actually chosen for great things and they have all this power that is unlike anything or anyone else the world has ever seen. And they're just awesome at pretty much everything that they do. It's kind of ironic how much I hate this trope because the lead character in my all-time favorite fantasy series, The Wheel of Time, is pretty much exactly this person. He's chosen by the fates and he is amazing at wielding the one power, even though, he doesn't really know what he's doing. I'm gonna cut Rand some slack though, because what happens with Rand is because we have 14 books, he does screw up quite a lot and he ends up doing things that ultimately hurt his own side or himself, or he does things that are really dangerous. He ends up killing a whole bunch of people on his own side. He has to learn on the job and it's difficult. There are times when he just can't perform. So he really goes through the ringer. And I think that's why I give Rand a bit of a break when it comes to this, but I often see the same trope played out in standalone novels and in smaller trilogies or series, and it always rubs me the wrong way because where is the character growth? Because the character does not have to work nearly as hard as anybody else really at getting better at their one thing, their one chosen thing, what happens is that they then have to grow at the expense of other people. They bring death and destruction upon other people, upon entire populations in some cases, and then use the misfortune that they have perpetrated or brought upon other people to fuel their own emotional growth, and that is just vile. It also upsets me when I see people saying things like Frodo is one of these characters, because he absolutely is not. I don't know where that comes from. Frodo is basically the entire opposite of this character. Frodo is not even a chosen one. He is a volunteered one, like nobody else thinks that they can do it. So Frodo stands up and takes this burden upon himself. And the entire series is about him learning to adjust and the deep emotional and mental and also physical price that he must pay in order to shoulder this burden. That's why everyone thinks Frodo is awesome. I am not here for the Frodo slander. The chosen one, on the other hand, can go straight into the pit of doom. That's fine. It's lazy, it's unearned, and apparently, from what I can see online at least, the only time people really have a problem with this particular trope is when a woman character does it. I see you guys. The other thing that I think we are all done with is the European medieval setting. I'm not saying that we can't have it anymore or that I don't enjoy it. I'm just saying that there are so many books out there where the fantasy world setting is literally just like 15th century Italy or something. I mean, if you like that much, then why don't you just read historical fiction? Their lives are so different that it just might be fantasy. Now, the books that I'm talking about are obviously not the ones where, we're talking about like an alt history version. I'm not talking about steampunk, for example. I do think some authors who try to use, historical setting but magic are sort of taking the mickey a little bit, but I'm inclined to give them just a bit of leeway just because there are authors out there who really do their research. And if you do your real research and if you have invested everything in recreating this world and you really understand the dynamics of it, and then you introduce a magic system into it to see how that would change the dynamics in there, then okay, yeah, I see that. That is a variation and it is clever. But the books that I am talking about, it is literally just the same historical setting, but with dragons. We've all read at least one series in fantasy like that, and it is lazy. I don't even understand the point of writing fantasy at that point. Like, if you can't be bothered to build a world, then why are you writing fantasy? And again, people trot out Tolkien, but like, Tolkien had very specific aims when he was writing Lord of the Rings. He was very much invested in the idea of English folklore, and he was writing a sort of mythos for England, and I think he was trying to address a gap that he thought existed. So, it's really interesting to read about him and about his motivations and who he was in his real life and why he wrote that series, which is entirely different from what I'm talking about. And also, Tolkien, the amount of research and, the things that he did, he literally built another world. There's a very lazy way of looking at Lord of the Rings as for England. I mean, yes, it is for England, but Tolkien invented whole languages. Are you kidding me? If you can invent other languages that people can actually speak with entire grammar and syntax, then sure, you too can write like for England. I wouldn't care. But the nerve of some people to use somebody like him to excuse their own laziness. I am not here for it. And also, I feel like it is an idea whose time has come and gone because it's 2020. There are so many different cultures and there are so many different people who are writing about, stories that are set in the East and in South America and in Africa, and they're using native folklore. And those worlds are so interesting and so imaginative, and it paints with so many more colors than we usually see in some of these middling pieces of fantasy that it is honestly just embarrassing to read some of the things that are still being published. Do better. Next up is the idea of a homogenous species, and this is when an entire race of beings are just, bad. And you'll see this in a variety of beloved classics, right? Like you'll see it in Lord of the Rings, Wheel of Time. Like there are so many beloved classics that use this trope. And it continues to be used in fiction that's being published today, and I think it is incredibly harmful. Like, it's not just lazy writing, I think it's actively harmful. And I'll tell you an example from my own culture. One of the great texts of Hinduism is this epic poem called the Ramayana, and that is the story of Lord Rama and his wife Sita and his younger brother Lakshman, and how they went into exile and Sita was kidnapped by this evil king, and then she was taken away, and then Rama has to go to war to win her back. Now in Hinduism, it's a lot more complicated, but I don't have a couple of hours to talk about these things, but very simply, there are three races. There are the Devas, the Asuras, and the race of man. And there is no real easy way to translate what these terms mean into English, because language is culture, and in English as a language, the words that we use to translate words like asur into English, it's most generally translated as demon, which has a very specific meaning in the Judeo-Christian tradition, which does not exist in Hinduism. But over the years and over the centuries, there's been a sort of identification of the devas who are light-skinned and tall and beautiful with, say, the North Indians, and then the asurs, who are often portrayed as being ugly and dark-skinned, as being South Indian, especially because the main antagonist of the Ramayana, Ravana, is a king from what is modern-day Sri Lanka, basically. And over the past few decades, there has been a socio-political movement in southern India called the Dravidian movement, which sort of tries to take back the narrative from traditional Hindu narratives and tries to locate where the South Indian body, the Dravidian body, is located within these cultural narratives. And it's complicated, and it's still a work in progress, and there's still a lot of racism, and that's the kind of thing that I am reminded of when I read some of these novels. And it appeals to impressionable minds. There are a number of people who read genre fiction without really thinking things through, and you don't even have to be aware of the way that these ideas seep into your mind to see how it affects how you treat certain people in real life. Which is why there's so much conversation about how black or dark is seen as evil in so many different pieces of literature, and how that relates to how we see black people in the West, for example. There's a very close relationship between the kind of political and social fear-mongering that we see in countries like the United States, centered around black people being lazy and violent, as compared to how these specific races who are described as, hulking and dark and evil in pieces of popular media, such as genre fiction. And so I think if you are writing in 2020, and I know that the National Novel Writing Month just ended, so there's probably a ton of you who've been writing genre fiction, and you need to really think about your ideas and how the words that you choose to describe the antagonists in your novel might translate to a larger audience. And also, if you're a reader, just take a minute and think about what it is that you're reading. Last up is the trope of good versus evil. And this is really closely tied to my previous point, in which, you have these two sides, and you have the antagonist who represents all evil, and then you have the protagonist who represents all positive things. And then the two of them come together, and what does it mean? And sometimes, you'll actually have the forces of good and evil speak through the central characters, I've seen this in the Eddings novels, and I've seen this in Wheel of Time. Like I said, a lot of these things that I'm talking about is pretty rich coming from a Wheel of Time fan, but it's because I'm a Wheel of Time fan. It's because I've grown up reading a lot of these things, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about these things and how it's affected me that I have such strong opinions about some of these things, and why I think in 2020 it's about time that we started seeing some real change. To be fair though, the idea of good and evil, I think that has been sort of shifting for quite a while now, and a lot of the newer fantasy has been sort of grappling with this idea. And perhaps I'm not really fond of pinning things to specific points without a lot more data points than I actually have at this moment. But I do think that the arrival of Game of Thrones and the way that it became such a huge influence First of all, in literature, and then also in terms of television, and therefore the larger media and popular culture. I think that has had a lot of effect on how people are posing ideas of moral relativity and about how things aren't entirely all good or all evil. But I also feel like that has led to a lot of people taking a completely nihilistic point of view where, you know, nothing matters anymore. And I think that it has to be a happy medium that can be struck between like going from a very black and white, good and evil kind of fantasy, and also a fantasy in which we're just saying, well, nothing matters, everything sucks. That might be true, but do we really need to see so many books that say that? Also, I don't really think that's true. Life matters. We matter. The way we feel matters. So those are my 4 tropes that I think could do with a bit of a rethink in these times. And I do want to say that, you know, I don't mean to say that there have been no good books that have been written with these tropes. Obviously they have. They've been incredibly successful, and that's why I think a lot of people emulate this. And I think when you're a reader and you really enjoy a specific genre and then you try to start writing it, and I do have some experience with this, but when you start writing things that you enjoy, like everyone tells you to, what happens is that you start to emulate things that you have enjoyed, and so you don't really think about why it is that you are choosing these things. You know, why are you making these choices rather than these other ones? And I think we could all do better just by thinking a bit more. At the very least, it would save you from listening to me go on and on about these things. Let me know if you think there are tropes in fantasy that have been played out, or whether you agree with this list, or if you don't agree with this list and you actually would like to see more things with all of these things. For more videos, please hit the subscribe button.